Well, 18 Republicans are pushing for President Trump to get the Nobel Peace Prize for his efforts on the Korean Peninsula. But there is a debate underway on Capitol Hill over whether President Trump should get any credit for bringing home the 3 American hostages who are looking live there as we await their arrival at Joint Base Andrews. As we've been reporting, they are on their way, set to arrive soon. We are tracking them. Of course, we'll take you live there when that happens.
The only reason this is happening is because President Trump believes in the maximum pressure doctrine. This wouldn't have happened under the strategic patience doctrine.
Our American citizens to come home. But when I look at the whole deal with North Korea, it seems to me that all of what was started with President Moon.
Our next guest has authored a seminal biography on former President George H.W. Bush and other bestsellers. What does he think about the emerging Trump doctrine? Let's welcome Jon Meacham. His brand new book, The Soul of America, The Battle for Our Better Angels, hit bookstores yesterday. Jon, great to have you with us tonight.
Thanks, Shannon.
Okay, so everyone's looking around to see who should and shouldn't get credit for the fact that these guys are coming home, and in addition, the fact that Kim Jong-un has been reaching out to South Korea, to China, and now potentially sitting down with President Trump. By the way, as that comes together, it's not happened yet. If it does, in the scope of presidential history, how historic is that?
It'll depend on what emerges out of those talks. It's certainly progress. It's about engagement, the doctrine of engagement, of trying to figure out whether we can strike deals that will bring stability and peace to that part of the world is essential. The world has never been smaller, and we're living in one where there are 9 members of a nuclear club, all of whom have the capacity to inflict unthinkable, unimaginable damage. And so, unquestionably, it seems to me that the American interest is to try to bring stability and try to contain, as much as possible, a dictator who we don't know simply whether or not he's a rational actor or not.
Yeah, and a number of administrations over the years have tried and failed, had some stops and starts, things that looked like they were going to be successful. Ultimately, North Korea was not an honest participant in much of that. I want to read you something from the Washington Post, a David Ignatius piece. He says this: would Kim have moved toward negotiations regardless of who was president? We'll never know. But there's no denying that Trump's confrontational approach created an opportunity for crisis diplomacy, and that he was bold enough to embrace Kim's offer of direct talks. What do you make of that characterization of how we got here?
It seems right to me. Sometimes, as the former Secretary of State used to say, Jim Baker, if it quacks like a duck and walks like a duck, it's a duck. We're having potentially a level of negotiation and engagement again that we've struggled for. The nature of the presidency historically is you can get credit for good things that happen on your watch, even if you didn't have a whole lot to do with them. You also get a lot of blame historically for things that go wrong on your watch, over which you had very little control. That's the nature of the job. Woodrow Wilson once said that the nature of the presidency was it allowed a man to be as big as he could. And we've also seen in our history, and I think a lot of people are worried today, that the president can also be as small as he might be. This doctrine, this idea of offering a threat, maximum pressure, I think is the phrase. If it works, then historians will look back and say having someone with a kind of bluster who then followed it up with careful diplomacy was a winning formula. We just don't know yet.
Yeah, and one of the key players in all of these discussions over the decades has been China. And there are a lot of people who think now China is the key actor in moving this thing forward. There have been scores of UN resolutions and sanctions, but it seems something different is happening this time around with China, at least in the last few months. There have been some skirting of the sanctions, but in some cases, a tougher application of those sanctions by China. How much do they get the credit?
I don't think we can apportion it until we know more. I think what's unquestionable is the story of Korea, of the Korean Peninsula, and of its implications for us is a story that goes back to the late 1940s. It's also, the entire drama is also a reminder of how important it is that while elections do have consequences, the country does have commitments. The peninsula has been the home of U.S. troops for 68 years or 70 years or so. We're talking about nearly 3/4 of a century of a projection of force in an attempt to create a stable country in the South. And one might hope that there'll be some reform in the North. China is very invested in this. because they don't want North Korean refugees. They don't want a nuclear war in their neighborhood. All of this, and the Iran news, the Korean, the hostages coming back, the detainees coming back, and the talks with North Korea remind us of how important all this is. This is about nuclear proliferation, which is arguably the most fundamental foreign policy story since 1945. Yeah. And Democrats and Republicans have both approached it in different ways through the years. And I think we hope for the best and we prepare for the worst.
Always a good idea. Jon Meacham, thank you for joining us, and congrats on the new book.
Thanks so much.
Good to see you.